Hello, and welcome to Season 5 of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and on the show, I'll share the interesting and inspiring stories of artists, critical thinkers, thought leaders, and art professionals on a wide range of topics about life, work, society, success and failure, and the ways in which we navigate life. We talk about our inspirations, concerns, and the ideas that motivate and propel us to create. Much of the show centers on visual arts and its pervasiveness in our society, how culture shapes our lives, and the responsibility of artists and curators not only to be truth tellers, but to advocate for and care for the massive impact that culture plays in our lives, from the things we believe in to the ways in which we understand ourselves. As I travel to art fairs, gallery openings, and events within the creative industries both in the U.S. and abroad, join me in discovering and learning about some of today's most interesting and dynamic artists and creative professionals. If you're new to the show, I'm glad to have you here. If you've been on this journey with me for a while, welcome back. Let's get it. On this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Joy Simmons. Dr. Joy Simmons is a radiologist, art collector, and philanthropist. In this episode, she discusses her multifaceted engagement with the arts. Beyond simply acquiring works, Dr. Simmons supports an entire arts ecosystem, from artists to small nonprofits to galleries and museums, through her work, her stewardship, and her commitment. She emphasizes the importance of visibility and community support for Black artists, writers, and curators. Dr. Simmons shares how her collection has grown over the years and the unique installations in her home, highlighting the personal and cultural significance behind each piece. In the episode, she also reflects on the evolving art scene, the importance of preserving Black culture through art, and the impact of the recent wildfires in LA and the sociopolitical changes on the art community. Let's dive into my next episode with Dr. Joy Simmons.
I'm Dr. Joy Simmons. I am a radiologist and a art collector philanthropist.
Joy Simmons, thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today. Besides simply collecting art, how do you more deeply engage with the arts?
I think for me personally, I believe in and have tried to do to support artists at all levels in the whole art ecosystem, from not only acquiring the work and supporting the artists that way, but supporting the other nonprofits that there are small nonprofits that are out there that really try to give artists a chance and support them early in their careers. Then you support the galleries that show the work and the museums and art fairs. There's all kinds of ways that I have participated. I have been on museum boards as well as the small nonprofit art boards to also facilitate and support artists in doing what they do and getting their work to be seen.
Yes, I love that you shared that. There are so many collectors who have, especially collectors of color, Black collectors across the globe, across the diaspora, whose focus is really on uplifting and stewarding artists of color, specifically Black artists. And you have some who are advocates, you have some who are curators, you have some who work within the field of being a philanthropist. When you think about all of those different sort of ways of participating, to your point, and engaging, do you feel that there's a particular way, an approach that you have, maybe more deeply responding to your first answer, that are, it's like that whether you're a philanthropist or a curator or a collector, are these some of the ways that you're thinking about how you've built your collection and what you want to continue to do moving forward?
I think as I began just learning, going to museums, going to galleries and looking at work, and then getting to know artists and finding out ways to be supportive, I began acquiring the work, but understanding that just me having the work or holding on to the work and understanding how important that is to the culture, I began to understand that a broader audience needed to see the work, and therefore moving to supporting small nonprofits that show the work, supporting curators that are trying to tell the stories, moving to the galleries and the bigger spaces that have an opportunity to show the work, and then again, museums and participating at that level is important. That's how I have grown into my work that I do as a collector and supporter.
Beautiful. And when you think about when you're ready to acquire a new work, when you're maybe meeting a new artist or discovering a new artist's work for the first time, what are some of the things that are most important to you when you're collecting?
For me, I am a very visual learner and very visual person, which is why I'm a radiologist, which is a physician that looks at images of the body to discern what could be the problem with a patient. And so for me, it's very visual at first. I want to see something that resonates with me right off the bat. I then try to look at the technique of the artist and how good they are to me. And then having the opportunity to talk to an artist, getting to understand their ideas and what they're trying to say is important, I think. For me, finding that really special piece and an artist that has not only the good technical skills, but the great ideas and what they're trying to say, that's when it's like chef's kiss. Then that's the piece for me. How I've been collecting all these years. I know all the artists in my collection, so I have a personal relationship with them, and that has been important to me, actually.
Yes. No, I think that this entire field, the arts in general, is such a relationship heavy business. Everything in the world is really about relationships, but you recognize when a person opens up their studio to you and invites you in, it's such a sacred space. It's such a space that invites a lot of vulnerability and a lot of deep questioning and a lot of openness. I find that the studio visit is really a place where you really get to learn more about an artist and understand their practice. And some of the conversations that happen during studio visits are like, you're not necessarily going to talk about that over coffee or lunch, right? There's a sense of intimacy that comes with building that close relationship. What are some of the most exciting things about being an art collector, in your opinion?
I started in college. I started getting posters. I began going to New York early in my freshman year and could not afford anything but posters at that time. And that's how I began to display them and feel about how I wanted my space, my little tiny dorm room, and then my apartment, how I wanted them to feel. And that was my beginning. And then I started with prints when I got to medical school. And then when I was able to meet the other artists here in Los Angeles, when I came back to medical school, then it was on at that point. But when I began collecting, and I've been doing this 50 years now, it wasn't such a thing. There wasn't such a social component to what happens in the art world now, especially for Black artists. Everybody was doing their little thing. There were a couple of Black galleries that built a sense of community and people interacting and getting together to do things and look at work and talk about work and do studio visits, but it was not the thing that it is now. It's quite interesting to see this development over the last few years.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful segue just to talk about where we are in the moment and where we are now. I was going to ask you to share maybe some of the pieces in your collection, why they stand out to you, what are some of the works that are really impactful for you. I'm sure there are favorites among many, but I think I love that you just mentioned where we are in the moment because it's indicative of a definite change, not only how people are speaking about art, how people are speaking about Black art, but also educating our own people in our own communities about the importance of supporting Black artists and being a steward of their work and being there from the ground up to as they grow, as they develop in deep conversation and deep community with artists who are investigating our world, who are thinking about how the pervasiveness of visual culture, who are being very resourceful and also just creating more beauty. Could you speak a little bit maybe about some of the things that you've seen over the last decade, maybe last 15 years that have been really resonant for you in this change of where we are within the popularity of Black art in the way that it is today?
I have personally focused my collection from the very beginning in the 70s about supporting Black artists and having art stories told. I think I am a physician, and it's not my skill set to impact culture in that way, but our artists are. And those stories need to be told, they need to be understood, they need to be preserved. And I am thrilled to see that people with capacity, younger collectors, just people in general, are understanding the importance of preserving our culture and supporting the people who are doing that work. Yeah. I am encouraged to see that happening. I think the important thing is that there are young people now who see that being an artist in whatever form that might be, performing arts, visual arts, and writers and curators now find that they can have viable careers and lives doing this work, and understanding that there is a community of Black people and others who are willing to support them in doing that.
Definitely. I think that might be a good segue to talk about, outside of the obvious, purchasing art, supporting artists, working on museum boards, donating to museums, using funding to support an artist's practice or a new body of work. What are some of the other things that people might not know that collectors do and engage in?
I think many times collectors don't appreciate that supporting curators is important. Some of them are in institutions that may have had a blip in their consciousness to be supportive of showing work by African American and African diasporic artists. And we have to show up to support those exhibitions. People may not understand that back in the old days, the curators just put together the exhibition, they told the stories, they got the work together, all of that, and somebody in development raised the money to do that. But now curators are expected to and need to find that support for their exhibitions in addition to whatever else the museum might be doing. Many times I don't think young collectors are aware or appreciate that financially supporting these exhibitions at museums, at bigger spaces, are important. And our names need to be on the wall, if you will. That other people come and understand that we believe in this work by the curator, by the artist, and this institution to do that.
We need our names on the walls. It's the same sentiment of having a seat at the table, participating in the conversation, that if you're not present and if you're not participating, how can you have a point of view or a say about what's happening?
Yeah.
And even additionally, if there are spaces that you haven't been invited to, doing the work of creating your own spaces, which I think we also see a lot of these sort of satellite projects that are just happening. They're rippling across the globe, where people from backgrounds that you might not have heard of, been thinking about, have heard of, they hadn't been on your radar before. People are engaging in projects across the globe, and a lot of young people who are asserting themselves in ways where they're steeped in thinking about culture and where we're going as a society and how they want to participate, what they want their contribution to be. I love that you mentioned that, because if you're not in the room, how can you be a part of it? I think this point about supporting curators, like supporting the ecosystem outside of the producer of work, right? So the artist, is a really important point, because I find for myself, there are a lot of times, as somebody who does multiple things, writing, journalism, curating, working on different projects and my show and all of the different things that I do. There are many times when I'm in rooms, especially with regards to press, where I'm either one of one or one of two or three people in the room who's representative of something, right? I'm one of a few women. I'm one of one Black woman. I'm one of one Black American woman. By the time you've just put all of these check marks next to what I represent, there's only one representative in the room, right? I often reflect on how important that is to be a part of what is happening, right? What are your thoughts about that?
I tell people all the time that collectors have to show up. They have to go to the museum openings. They have to go to galleries. They have to go to the fairs. They have to be seen. Because again, if we're not seen, even if we're not at that table, it still builds a momentum that we care. And then you start supporting the curators, supporting the writers, supporting them so that those stories do percolate up. And then your involvement starts percolating up, and they see you, the others, see you and say, she might be like somebody we need to talk to more. We may need to see her more. And you show up. And most of that is just like showing up. And then you start to make the connections and the network to then be a part of the bigger decision making process. And that is being on museum boards, or I was a trustee at a major university, and making sure that the arts were a big part of this university that was really more techie oriented. And we said, no, the arts are important. These students need this, and pushing for that to happen. And now it's a major part of what happens at that university. But it was a push because some people several years ago didn't think that should be a major part of education. And we have to be in those spaces to be able to ensure that all students, and particularly our students, can see that these are viable careers, viable outlets for expression.
Yes, absolutely. As we round out the episode with the last question, I want to talk a little bit about Freeze LA. It ended a couple of weeks ago, and before the announcement came that it would go forward with all of the devastation and the wildfires happening, I'm sure there were a lot of questions in everyone's mind as to if Freeze LA would continue on and if the fair would present again for this edition. So I'd love to ask you, what was that like? What was Art Week like in LA, and the energy during the fair, and maybe seeing folks you hadn't seen in a while, seeing art from artists you might not have seen in a while? And what was the pulse of how did it feel to be there with the just on the backdrop of what had taken place in LA just prior?
I think during and after the fires, the city was just in shock. People rallied to support, and people were in shock because they just couldn't believe how large and how extensive the damage was. The Palisades fire, which is on the west side of town, had an acreage that was larger than the size of Manhattan. When you really put it in those kind of terms, I think people were just like in shock. And then you had the Altadena fire, where the loss and the impact of a large community of Black folks, that was also like people were just like trashed. And they just couldn't even think for several days while this was going on. When the fair decided to come back to Los Angeles and move forward, I think people were really excited, and they needed that kind of jolt of what are the creatives doing. We did have conversations about the impact of the Altadena fire in particular at Freeze LA, and the Davis family that have a couple of generations of artists were able to talk about their experience and the loss and all of that. So I think it was a good thing because not only did you have Freeze, but you had Felix, you had the post office, you had other satellite fairs that were going on at the same time. So it really brought a welcome energy to the city. So I think now in the rebuilding stage, people are looking at, okay, so what do we have to do now? What's next?
Yes, no, it seemed like from all of the reports that I heard back, just talking to folks who had been there, attending the fairs, folks who were presenting work, galleries who were presenting, it seemed like the energy that LA really showed up for LA, so to speak.
Yes, they did.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love.
One of the things that did happen during the fires, which may be problematic, is that people, at least people, collectors that I've been speaking to, really understood just how quickly things could be gone. These families lost everything in a matter of minutes. And what does that mean about collecting and acquiring? Where do you put the work? How does that happen? What happens next? It's going to be very interesting. Then you have the part about the new atmosphere of the United States right now and our culture at large that appears to be having a challenging perspective for people of color, and particularly Black people. So I've been thinking about what kind of work needs to be done to preserve our culture, and preserve our institutions when there are forces about that are trying to dismantle them. There's a movement afoot that is very serious. And I think my thoughts are going towards preserving our institutions, that they stand and that they last, be it ethnic specific museums, be it our HBCUs, be it our gallery spaces, even you're bringing it down more granularly and supporting those artists as they try to figure out what this landscape is going to look like. It's changed so fast in 2 months. Who knows what it's going to be like in 4 years? But I think we have to take these signals very seriously and get prepared.
That's such a important and critical note, not only the call to action to take it serious and to not just sweep these things under the rug that are being said and the rollbacks that we're seeing in the American government, but also to that call to be prepared for what could potentially come, to double down on our efforts to stay in closer community with each other, in closer dialogue, and continuing to support each other in the ways that we can. To hear you speak about your collecting journey and what's important to you and what you're thinking about these days is really resonating with me.
I've been very fortunate to have met and worked with so many artists and curators over my career, and it's always a thrill to share and encourage more people to be supportive, to understand that supporting artists by acquiring work to keep them doing what they're doing is really part of a bigger picture of supporting our culture and telling our stories of this time and this space and this place. And it's important for people who have the capacity, whatever level that is, from posters to installations to sculptures to whatever, to let these artists do what they do and help our culture be around and available for people to know about in the next millennia.
Absolutely. Okay. Can you talk about some of the works in your collection that stand out to you and why?
Some of the works that are important to me, impactful to me, but you're not supposed to have a favorite child. I think for me, and what sets my collection a little bit differently than other collectors, is that I found it fascinating and fun for artists to do installations in my home and to pick their spots, do their thing, and that's where we are. So Lauren Halsey did an intervention on some columns that I have in my home. So there are true columns that hold up part of the second floor, and she did her work on those columns. And there's Genevieve Gagnard, who I saw a painting that I purchased from one of her shows, Prospect 4, and she took that painting and then did a whole intervention on a bathroom in my home. Dominique Moody just did an outdoor sculpture for me with a bottle tree that harkens back to the South, where Black people used the dead tree in the front, put bottles on them to ward off bad spirits. And so she did that intervention, and we had a whole ceremony about protecting my home. I've had muralists from Keith Williams, K-Dub, in the Bay Area come down and do a mural on one side of the house and the whole jacuzzi area. Patrick Henry Johnson, an artist here in Los Angeles, took another area and wall to do an intervention. So these kinds of, I think, interventions or installations makes my collection a little different than most other collectors. But it also, for me, shows a level of commitment as a collector, because these pieces stay and they will forever be, I'm never going to paint over them. It's just part of my home now. And it is something very special to me to do that. Or I had an artist, E.J. Hill, who did work in neon, but I let him choose we interacted together and I let him come up with the phrase that he wanted and the neon that he wanted to make. And I let him select the spot in my home for it to be placed. And that's what we did. Again, I think engaging with artists on that level has always been fun and exciting for me. And these particular works are just special because they are permanent, if you will. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. How does the art in your home make you feel? And when you're rotating your collection, how do you choose what to display in your home?
I tell people all the time that my home is very important to me. With a lot of help from a lot of people, I built this home, this structure, and made it into my home. And it was very important for me so that when you even drive by this address, that's Joy's home. The stained glass doors, everything. I wanted it to reflect me and my sensibilities from the very beginning. As a Black woman physician and the only one in my medical school class, you spoke about being the only, and I've had to deal with that as well, as do many of us. And so to me, I try to tell people that when you return from slaying dragons out there in the world, to come home to a space that you have made yours is extremely important. It is important to you and your spirit and how you feel nurtured. It is also important to your children, and now for me, for my grandchildren, to be able to see a space that affirms their Blackness, that affirms their beauty and power. That's important to me. And that's what I try to do, and which is why I share my home, maybe overshare, but anyway, my home on various outlets, because if people don't see it, they don't understand it and appreciate that I buy what I love, I move it around, things fit according to my whims, if you will. That's my curator impact. And sometimes it really does fall into a story that a certain section tells this story, or the dining room has these kinds of images and or colors because you want the food to be the center stage, and these more muted colors, even though they're powerful images, are not quite as bright and did. Or there are spaces that have a lot of representational art, lots of faces, if you will. But then for me, I come home and can sit on the sofa with a glass of champagne, regroup from my day, and still sit up there with my peeps, i.e., the images on my walls, and just kick it and just enjoy that moment before I then have to do a dinner and blah, blah, blah. Or the library that has way too many books. So there's not so many images, but then it's another cozy space, and how the work in there makes you feel. So what can I say? I just do me.
I love it, Joy. As you were speaking, I was thinking about a bunch of things, but one was this little bait clip that I saw on Instagram the other day of Don Lemon having, I'm sure, what was a very difficult conversation with Elon Musk about DEI and talking about physicians. And Don shared a statistic that only 5% of doctors in America that are Black. And I just thought that was such a wild number. And so
Yes.
for you to speak about being the only in your class, for me to share that experience as well, and then for you to speak about being able to come home and escape all of that outside in the world and sit down with a glass. I can just see you now sitting down with a glass of champagne at home in your living room, looking at all your peeps, feeling that comfort, feeling a sense of place, feeling a sense of pride that is so important for us as Black people in America and across the globe to have that feeling about who we are and what we are, right?
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for that share and for generously opening up about that, because I think on so many levels, seeing yourself represented in a way that celebrates you and allows you to be in the fullness of everything that you are is something that we all deserve. Everyone deserves that. And so it's beautiful to think about that. Thank you so much. This was lovely.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That was my episode with Dr. Joy Simmons. I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to Joy for joining me on the show. And it's a wrap, folks. That was our episode of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected. Conversations on culture and current events with some of today's hottest creative contemporaries. These episodes are recorded remotely and on location wherever in the world that I find myself, whether that be Africa, the US, Europe, the Middle East, or the Caribbean. Depending on where I am at the time of these recordings, you will hear the sights and the sounds of my local environment. I look forward to continuing these wonderful conversations with you, with artists and creative professionals across a variety of industries. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and we'll see you next time. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love, y'all. We out.